Everybody wants to be healthy. One of the ways is by maintaining your ideal weight. But how can you know what is your ideal weight? In this video, I will show you 3 ways you can calculate your ideal weight. The first one, probably the most popular one, is using the body mass index, or BMI. BMI is a useful measure of overweight and obesity. It is calculated from your height and weight. BMI is an estimate of body fat, and a good gauge of your risk for diseases that can occur with more body fat. The higher your BMI, the higher your risk for certain diseases such as heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, gallstones, breathing problems, and certain cancers. To calculate your BMI, you just need to know your height and weight. Take your height measurement in kilogram and divide them by your height measurement in meters squared. For example, if your height is 1.8 meters and your weight is 76 kilograms, you just square your height measurement first, and you will get 3.24. Now, take your weight measurement, which is 76, and divide them by the earlier number. So 76 divided by 3.24 is 23.5. That is your BMI. Your BMI should be between 18.5 and 24.9. If your BMI is below 18.5, you are underweight. If your BMI is between 25 and 29.9, you are overweight. And if your BMI is 30 or above, you can be considered obese. You can also refer to the body mass index table to know your BMI. Although BMI can be used for most men and women, it does have some limits. It may overestimate body fat in athletes and others who have a muscular build. And also, it may underestimate body fat in older persons and others who have lost muscle. The second method to know your ideal weight is using the waist-to-hip ratio. You can figure out your waist-to-hip ratio on your own, or your doctor can do it for you. To measure it yourself, stand up straight and breathe out. Use a tape measure to check the distance around the smallest part of your waist, just above your belly button. This is your waist circumference. Then measure the distance around the largest part of your hips, the widest part of your buttocks. This is your hip circumference. Calculate your waist-to-hip ratio by dividing your waist circumference by your hip circumference. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, a healthy waist-to-hip ratio is 0.9 or less in men and 0.85 or less for women. In both men and women, a waist-to-hip ratio of 1.0 or higher increases the risk for heart disease and other conditions that are linked to being overweight. What are the advantages of using this method? Waist-to-hip ratio is an easy, inexpensive, and accurate way to see how much body fat you have. It can also help predict your risk for heart disease and diabetes. A few studies suggest that waist-to-hip ratio is even more accurate than BMI for predicting the risks of cardiovascular disease and premature death. This method could be particularly useful in certain groups of people. For example, waist-to-hip ratio may be a better gauge of obesity in older adults whose body composition has changed. What are the disadvantages of using this method? It's easy to make mistakes while checking waist-to-hip ratio because you need to take 2 separate measurements. And it can be hard to get an accurate measurement of your hips. Certain people won't be able to get an accurate measure using waist-to-hip ratio, including those who are shorter than 5 feet tall and those who have a BMI of 35 or higher. Waist-to-hip ratio is also not recommended for use in children. The last simple method is the waist-to-height ratio. The waist-to-height ratio is a measure of the distribution of body fat. The higher someone's waist-height ratio is, the higher their risk of obesity-related cardiovascular diseases, as it is a rough estimate of obesity. Studies have found that a person's waist-height ratio is a good indicator of their risk of heart attack, stroke or death, while its link to diabetes hasn't been proved yet. How to do the measurement? Firstly, measure your waist. Practically, the measurements are usually taken at the smallest circumference of the natural waist. Then, just measure your height. The waist-height ratio is calculated as waist measurement divided by height measurement in centimeters. For example, a person with a 71 centimeters waist and 170 centimeters height has a waist-height ratio of 0.42. The result should be around 0.5. Or you can see the diagram here. The blue area indicates take care, you might be underweight. The green area indicates okay. Yellow area indicates consider action for adults and take action for children. Red area indicates take action. There it is. 3 simple ways to calculate your ideal weight. Know you can do it yourself.